The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens of Windsor Castle as staff members hurried through their daily routines. Inside the grand residence, an unusual tension hung in the air like a heavy fog. Butler James Henderson, who had served the royal family for nearly 3 decades, noticed something was different that Tuesday morning. The usual cheerful chatter among the housekeeping staff had been replaced by hushed whispers and nervous glances. In the blue drawing room, Prince William sat rigidly in an ornate chair, his jaw clenched as he reviewed the morning papers. The headlines screamed about Catherine's latest health concerns, but something else had caught his attention. A leaked memo from the palace communications team suggested that certain members of the family had been discussing Catherine's future role while she recovered from her recent surgery. The document bore Camilla's distinctive approval stamp. Catherine herself remained upstairs in their private quarters, unaware of the storm brewing below. She had been feeling particularly weak that morning, the effects of her treatment still taking their toll on her body. William had insisted she rest, promising to handle the day's royal obligations on her behalf. But as he read through the papers, his protective instincts flared into something more dangerous. The memo detailed suggestions for redistributing Catherine's patronages and public appearances, citing concerns about her ability to fulfill her duties. What infuriated William most was the clinical, almost dismissive tone with which his wife's condition was discussed. There was no mention of temporary arrangements or support systems. Instead, the document read like a corporate restructuring plan, cold and calculated. Lady Sarah Chatto, who had arrived early for a scheduled meeting about a charity event, later recalled sensing the electricity in the air as she walked through the palace corridors. Staff members seemed to scatter at the sound of approaching footsteps, and even the usually stoic guards appeared more alert than usual. She found herself waiting in an antechamber, listening to the muffled sounds of raised voices from somewhere deeper in the palace. William's anger had been building for weeks. He had watched his wife struggle through her health challenges with remarkable grace, all while certain family members seemed more concerned with public perception than her well-being. The constant pressure for Catherine to maintain appearances, even during her most difficult days, had pushed him to his limits. This memo was the final straw. As he stood from his chair, the papers crumpled in his grip. William's mind raced through years of perceived slights and subtle undermining. He thought of Catherine's tears after particularly harsh criticism from senior royals, the time she had been excluded from important family decisions, and the whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered a room. His protective nature, usually kept in check by royal protocol, threatened to overwhelm his careful composure. Meanwhile, Camilla was in the green salon, unaware of the approaching confrontation. She was reviewing her own schedule with her private secretary, discussing upcoming state visits and charity galas. In her mind, the memo about Catherine's duties was simply practical planning. Someone needed to ensure the monarchy's work continued smoothly, regardless of personal circumstances. She had learned long ago that the institution came first, individual feelings second. The palace staff, sensing trouble, began to clear the corridors between the blue drawing room and the green salon. Head of household Margaret Whitmore, a woman who had weathered many royal storms, quietly instructed junior staff to find urgent tasks in other wings of the castle. She had seen that particular expression on Prince William's face only a handful of times, and it never boded well for whoever was on the receiving end of his displeasure. As William strode through the palace hallways, his footsteps echoing off marble floors, he passed portraits of his ancestors, kings and queens who had faced their own family dramas behind these same walls. But unlike them, William had grown up in a different era, one where he had witnessed firsthand the devastating effects of putting institutional needs above family loyalty. He would not allow history to repeat itself with Catherine. The journey from one room to another took only minutes. But for those who witnessed it, time seemed to slow. Security personnel discreetly spoke into their radios, alerting others to the prince's unusual demeanor. Even the ancient suits of armor lining the corridors seemed to stand at greater attention as William passed, his face set with determination. In her office, Camilla's assistant, Emma Thompson, noticed the sudden change in atmosphere. The cheerful morning sunshine streaming through tall windows seemed to dim as footsteps approached. She glanced at her phone, seeing several urgent messages from other staff members, all containing variations of the same warning. But before she could alert Camilla, the door opened with more force than typical royal decorum would allow. William entered the room without the usual formal announcement, his presence filling the space with barely contained emotion. Camilla looked up from her papers, surprise flickering across her carefully composed features. She had faced many challenging moments since joining the royal family, but the intensity in her stepson's eyes was something new. The memo, now clearly visible in his clenched hand, told her everything she needed to know about the reason for this unexpected visit. The Green Salon, with its priceless artwork and centuries of history, had witnessed many significant moments in royal life. Treaties had been signed within its walls, marriages arranged, and dynasties planned, but the confrontation about to unfold would be remembered by those present as one of the most raw and emotionally charged events they had ever witnessed within the palace walls. Emma Thompson quickly excused herself, closing the heavy oak door behind her with a soft click that seemed to echo with finality. In the hallway, she found several other staff members who had clearly been drawn by the same invisible force that pulled palace personnel toward brewing drama like moths to flame. They stood at a respectful distance, close enough to intervene if needed but far enough to maintain plausible deniability about what they might overhear. Inside the room, William's usual careful diplomacy had evaporated. Years of boarding school education, military training, and royal protocol coaching fell away as he confronted the woman who had become his stepmother. The memo fluttered as his hand trembled with suppressed emotion, each word on the page representing what he saw as a betrayal of the woman he loved. Camilla, for her part, maintained her seated position, though her posture had stiffened noticeably. She had navigated hostile press, public skepticism, and family tensions for years, but this was different. This was not about her past or her position. This was about Catherine, the woman who had seemed to effortlessly win the public's love in a way Camilla never could. The comparison, though unspoken, hung in the air between them like an invisible barrier. The morning routine of the palace continued around them, though with a noticeably subdued quality. Maids went about their duties with extra quiet care. Gardeners found reasons to work in areas far from the Green Salon's windows, and even the kitchen staff preparing lunch spoke in whispers. The palace, like a living organism, seemed to hold its breath. In the private quarters above, Catherine remained blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding in her name. She dozed fitfully, her body still fighting to regain strength. In her dreams, she was back in her university days, walking across St. Andrew's campus with a young William, both of them free from the weight of crowns and expectations. She could never have imagined that years later, her husband would be fighting a battle for her dignity within the very walls that were supposed to be their sanctuary. The tension in the Green Salon had reached a breaking point. William's voice, usually so controlled and measured in public, carried through the thick door despite his efforts to maintain some semblance of royal composure. Staff members in the vicinity found urgent reasons to be elsewhere, their trained discretion warring with natural human curiosity about the historic confrontation taking place. This was not just about a memo or scheduling conflicts. This was about fundamental differences in how the modern monarchy should function, about loyalty versus duty, about family versus institution. William represented a new generation of royals who had seen the devastating consequences of prioritizing public image over personal well-being. Camilla embodied the traditional approach, where personal sacrifices were expected and emotions were luxuries the royal family could not afford to indulge. As the confrontation escalated, the very walls of Windsor seemed to vibrate with the intensity of emotions being unleashed. Centuries of careful protocol and rigid hierarchy were being challenged in real time, and everyone within the palace walls understood they were witnessing a pivotal moment in royal history. The reverberations of this clash would be felt throughout the institution, potentially reshaping how the monarchy operated for generations to come. The heavy silence that preceded William's explosion was more terrifying than any shout could have been. Camilla watched as her stepson's face transformed from controlled anger to unleashed fury. The words that erupted from him shattered the carefully maintained royal composure that had been drilled into him since birth. "How dare you?" William's voice thundered through the Green Salon, causing a priceless vase to vibrate on its pedestal. "How dare you sit there and plan my wife's replacement while she fights for her health? Have you learned nothing from the past?" Camilla's face paled, but she held her ground. Years of public scrutiny had given her a thick skin. But this attack from within the family walls was unexpected. She stood slowly, her own dignity intact despite the assault on her character. "William, you're being dramatic. This is simply contingency planning. The monarchy must continue to function. Function? William's laugh was bitter, devoid of any humor. Is that what you call it when you draft documents discussing my wife as if she were a broken piece of machinery to be replaced? She's not a function, Camilla. She's a person, a mother, my partner. Outside the door, Emma Thompson pressed her back against the wall, her heart racing. In her years of service, she had never heard Prince William raise his voice in such a manner. Other staff members had gathered at strategic points throughout the corridor, ostensibly busy with various tasks but clearly attuned to every word penetrating the thick oak door. Margaret Whitmore, the head of household, appeared at the end of the hallway, her experienced eyes taking in the scene. She had served through divorces, scandals, and deaths. But this felt different. This was not just a family dispute. It was a generational clash that could reshape the monarchy's future. She quietly gestured for the younger staff to disperse, though she herself remained within earshot, ready to intervene if necessary. Inside the salon, William's tirade continued unabated. You speak of the monarchy's function, but what about its humanity? What about the promises we make to support each other? Catherine has given everything to this family, her privacy, her normal life, her health, and this is how she's repaid, with cold calculations about her replacement. He threw the crumpled memo onto Camilla's pristine desk, where it landed among her carefully organized papers like a grenade. She read reports like this about my mother too, clinical discussions about her stability, her future role, her usefulness to the crown, and we all know how that ended. The mention of Diana hung in the air like a specter. Camilla's composure finally cracked, her voice rising to match William's intensity. Don't you dare compare me to that situation. I have done nothing but try to support this family, to ensure its continuity. By plotting behind our backs? William's voice cracked with emotion. By treating my wife's illness as an inconvenience to your schedule? Catherine has shown you nothing but respect, despite everything, despite the history, despite the comparisons, and this is how you honor that respect? The argument had drawn the attention of other family members. Prince Edward, who had been in a nearby office, found himself frozen in place as the raised voices carried through the walls. He remembered similar confrontations from decades past, the same passionate defense of a spouse against institutional coldness. History, it seemed, had a cruel way of repeating itself. Camilla's own anger finally surfaced. I have never plotted against Catherine. This memo was a practical response to a practical problem. Someone has to think about these things, William. Someone has to ensure that the monarchy's work continues, regardless of personal circumstances. That's what being royal means. No. William's fist slammed onto a side table, causing everyone within hearing distance to flinch. That's what being royal meant. That's the old way. The way that destroyed my mother. That nearly destroyed this entire institution. We're supposed to be different now. We're supposed to have learned. The Green Salon's atmosphere had become electric with tension. Portraits of past monarchs gazed down from the walls, silent witnesses to this modern crisis. The room, which had hosted diplomatic meetings and state occasions, now contained a raw family drama that threatened to tear apart the careful facade of royal unity. Your wife is ill, Camilla said, her voice now cold and controlled. That is unfortunate, and I sympathize. But the monarchy cannot pause for personal tragedies. It never has. Your grandmother understood this. Your father understands this. One day, you will understand this too. William's response was immediate and volcanic. Understand? I understand perfectly. I understand that you see us all as chess pieces to be moved around your board. I understand that Catherine's suffering means nothing to you beyond its impact on your precious schedules. I understand that you've learned nothing from watching this family tear itself apart over exactly this kind of heartless calculation. The sound of footsteps in the corridor increased as more senior palace staff arrived, drawn by the unprecedented volume of the confrontation. Even the palace guard had been alerted, though they remained at a respectful distance. This was not a security threat in the traditional sense, but the emotional violence of the exchange was palpable. In her chamber above, Catherine stirred in her sleep, unaware that her husband was fighting perhaps the most important battle of their marriage. She had always been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over tensions and brought harmony to family gatherings. But William had reached his breaking point watching her struggle to meet impossible expectations while battling her health challenges. Back in the Green Salon, the confrontation had reached a crescendo. You want to know what I think about your memo? William snatched the paper from the desk, tearing it into pieces with deliberate fury. This is what I think of your contingency planning. Catherine is not going anywhere. She will recover. She will return to her duties when she's ready, and she will do so with the full support of this family. Or so help me, Camilla. I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of support she's been receiving behind closed doors. The threat hung in the air like a drawn sword. Both of them knew the power of public opinion, the devastating effect that leaked palace conflicts could have on the monarchy's carefully cultivated image. Camilla's face had gone from pale to flushed, her usual composure completely shattered. "You're threatening me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper but laden with indignation. "You're threatening the stability of the crown over a scheduling memo?" "I'm protecting my family," William responded, his voice now deadly quiet. "The same way my mother tried to protect us. The difference is, I've learned from her mistakes. I know how this institution works. I know its pressure points, and I know exactly what battles are worth fighting. This is one of them." The silence that followed was deafening. Staff members held their breath, waiting for the next explosion. But instead, William straightened his jacket, the gesture oddly formal after such an emotional outburst. He looked every inch the future king, but one who had just made it clear that his reign would be different from those who came before. "Catherine will take all the time she needs to recover," he stated, his tone brooking no argument. "There will be no more memos, no more contingency planning, no more discussions about her role that don't include both of us. And if I find out that anyone in this palace is working to undermine her position or question her capability, they will answer directly to me. Is that clear?" Camilla stood frozen, her mind racing through the implications of this confrontation. She had underestimated William's protective instincts, had failed to recognize how his past experiences had shaped his approach to family loyalty. The boy who had walked behind his mother's coffin had grown into a man who would not allow history to repeat itself. "I asked if that was clear," William repeated, his voice carrying the authority of his position despite his relatively young age. "Perfectly clear," Camilla managed, though the words seemed to stick in her throat. The door to the green salon opened with enough force to bang against the wall, causing everyone in the corridor to jump. William emerged like a storm breaking, his face still flushed with anger but his bearing absolutely royal. Staff members scattered before him like leaves before a wind, though Margaret Whitmore stood her ground, offering a subtle nod of acknowledgement as he passed. The prince's footsteps echoed through the palace as he made his way back to his private quarters, leaving behind a stunned silence that seemed to permeate every corner of Windsor Castle. In the green salon, Camilla sank back into her chair, the torn pieces of the memo scattered across her previously pristine desk like confetti from a revolution. Emma Thompson cautiously re-entered the room, finding her employer staring at the destroyed document with an unreadable expression. Neither woman spoke, but both understood that something fundamental had shifted in the palace dynamics. The younger generation had thrown down a gauntlet, challenging the old ways with a ferocity that couldn't be ignored. Throughout the palace, staff members exchanged meaningful glances and hushed conversations. They had witnessed many family dramas over the years, but this felt different. This was not just a personal conflict but a declaration of a new order, a sign that the future king would not sacrifice family for duty in the way his predecessors had. As news of the confrontation spread through the palace grapevine, reactions were mixed. Younger staff members, many of whom had watched William and Catherine's romance bloom and seen their dedication to each other, felt a surge of admiration for the prince's defense of his wife. Older retainers, steeped in tradition and protocol, worried about what this meant for the institution they had served their entire lives. In the kitchen, where palace gossip often found its most fertile ground, the head chef paused in his preparation of lunch. He had been with the royal household long enough to remember similar scenes from decades past. But this had a different quality. "The young prince has his mother's spirit," he murmured to his sous chef, who nodded in agreement. The reverberations of the confrontation continued to ripple through Windsor Castle as the morning gave way to afternoon. Scheduled meetings were quietly cancelled. Routine tasks were performed with unusual quietness, and everyone seemed to be waiting for the next shoe to drop. The palace, usually a model of controlled activity, felt like a held breath. Meanwhile, William had returned to his private quarters where Catherine still rested, unaware of the battle that had just been fought in her name. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her sleep, his anger gradually giving way to a fierce protectiveness. She looked so fragile against the pillows. But he knew her strength, had seen her face every challenge with grace and determination. As he settled into a chair beside the bed, William reflected on what had just occurred. He had crossed a line, had broken protocol in a way that would have horrified his grandmother, but he also knew he would do it again in a heartbeat. The days of suffering in silence, of allowing the institution to grind down the people within it, were over. At least, they would be when his time came to lead. The torn memo in Camilla's office would be swept away by evening, but its impact would linger far longer. The confrontation between William and Camilla had exposed fundamental tensions within the royal family, differences in philosophy that went beyond personal animosity to the very heart of what the monarchy should be in the modern world. The aftermath of William's explosive confrontation with Camilla rippled through the palace like aftershocks from an earthquake. By evening, every member of the royal household, from the highest-ranking officials to the newest kitchen staff, knew something momentous had occurred. The careful balance of power that had existed within the palace walls had shifted dramatically, and everyone was struggling to find their footing in this new landscape. King Charles, who had been attending an investiture ceremony at Buckingham Palace, received word of the incident through his private secretary. The color drained from his face as he read the carefully worded report, his hand trembling slightly as he set down the paper. He had spent years trying to maintain harmony between his wife and his sons, and now that delicate peace had been shattered in the most dramatic fashion possible. The journey back to Windsor was made in tense silence. Charles sat in the back of the royal car, his mind racing through possible solutions to this family crisis. He understood both perspectives, Camilla's practical approach to royal duties and William's fierce protection of Catherine, but understanding and resolving were two very different things, and he feared this confrontation had opened wounds that might never fully heal. At Windsor Castle, the atmosphere remained electric with tension. Staff members went about their duties with exaggerated care, speaking in hushed tones and avoiding any areas where family members might be encountered. The usual evening routines felt like carefully choreographed dances around invisible landmines. Catherine finally woke as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. She found William sitting beside her bed, his face bearing the signs of intense emotion. With the intuition that came from years of marriage, she immediately sensed something significant had happened. "William?" she asked softly, reaching for his hand. "What's wrong?" He took her hand gently, his thumb tracing circles on her palm as he considered how to explain the day's events. "There was an incident today. With Camilla. About you." Catherine's eyes widened, but she remained quiet, allowing him to continue at his own pace. William told her everything. The memo, the suggestions about redistributing her duties, and his confrontation with his stepmother. As he spoke, Catherine's expression shifted from surprise to understanding to a deep sadness. "Oh, William," she sighed when he finished. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did," he interrupted firmly. "I've watched you push yourself beyond your limits, trying to meet everyone's expectations while dealing with your health. I've seen you cry after particularly harsh criticism, seen you doubt yourself when you're the strongest person I know. Enough is enough. Catherine, the institution serves us, not the other way around." Downstairs, Charles had arrived and was closeted with Camilla in their private apartments. The conversation was intense but quieter than William's earlier eruption. Camilla, still shaken from the morning's confrontation, struggled to maintain her composure as she related the events to her husband. "He was like a man possessed, Charles," she said, her voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I've never seen him like that. The anger, the accusations. He compared me to how Diana was treated." Charles winced at the mention of his first wife. That comparison was his greatest fear, the ghost that haunted every decision he made regarding his sons. He had worked so hard to prevent history from repeating itself, and now it seemed those efforts might have been in vain. "The memo was a mistake," he said finally. "We should have discussed any concerns about Catherine's duties as a family, not through palace bureaucracy." Camilla's defenses rose. "Someone has to think practically, Charles. The monarchy requires unity." Charles interrupted gently but firmly. "It requires us to support each other, especially in times of crisis." William was right about that. Even if his methods were excessive, the admission cost Charles dearly. He could see the hurt in Camilla's eyes, the feeling of betrayal that her husband wasn't taking her side completely. But he also knew that the future of the monarchy rested with William and Catherine, and alienating them over bureaucratic procedures would be catastrophic for the institution he had waited his entire life to lead. As night fell over Windsor Castle, various members of the royal family and their staff attempted to process the day's events. Prince Harry, contacted by mutual friends within the palace, felt a complex mix of emotions: pride in his brother for standing up for his wife, sadness at being so far removed from the family drama, and a bitter understanding of the pressures that had led to such an explosion. Princess Anne, ever the pragmatist, had her own thoughts on the matter when informed by her private secretary. "About time someone shook things up," she muttered, though she kept her opinions largely to herself. She had seen too many family members crushed under the weight of institutional expectations and privately applauded William's defense of his wife, even if the method was unorthodox. In the days that followed, the palace attempted to return to normal operations, but the confrontation had fundamentally altered the dynamics within the royal household. Camilla, stung by the encounter and her husband's lukewarm support, withdrew into a cold formality that made family gatherings excruciating. She performed her duties impeccably but maintained a careful distance from William and Catherine. William, for his part, showed no signs of regret. If anything, the confrontation seemed to have emboldened him. He became more protective of Catherine, more willing to challenge traditional protocols that he felt were outdated or harmful. Palace staff noticed a new authority in his bearing, a king in waiting who had found his voice and wasn't afraid to use it. Catherine's recovery took on a new dimension after the incident. Freed from the pressure of premature return to duties, she was able to focus entirely on her health. The palace issued a statement supporting her extended recovery period, notably signed by all senior members of the royal family, including Camilla. Behind the scenes, William had made it clear that public unity was non-negotiable. Whatever private tensions might exist, the British public, largely unaware of the specific details but sensing a shift through careful analysis of royal appearances and statements, generally supported what they perceived as William modernizing the monarchy. Catherine's popularity, already high, soared even further as news of her husband's fierce protection leaked through carefully managed palace sources. International media picked up on the tensions, with royal correspondents noting the careful choreography required to keep William and Camilla from being photographed together at official events. Body language experts analyzed every interaction, finding coldness where perhaps none existed, and meaning in every glance and gesture. Within the palace, a new normal slowly emerged. Younger staff members found themselves aligned with William's vision of a more compassionate, family-first monarchy. Older retainers, while personally sympathetic to Catherine's plight, worried about the long-term implications of prioritizing personal needs over institutional requirements. Margaret Whitmore, the head of household, became instrumental in navigating this new landscape. With decades of experience, she instituted subtle changes that acknowledged the shift in power dynamics while maintaining the smooth operation of the palace. Meetings about royal schedules now included health and well-being as primary considerations, not afterthoughts. The Christmas season brought the first major test of the new family dynamics. The traditional gathering at Sandringham was fraught with tension. Despite everyone's best efforts to maintain appearances, William and Camilla exchanged only the most perfunctory pleasantries, their interactions formal to the point of coldness. Charles found himself playing mediator, a role he had never wanted but seemed destined to fill. He spent hours in private conversations with both parties, trying to bridge the gap that had opened between them. Progress was slow and painful, with setbacks occurring whenever either William or Camilla felt their position was being undermined. Catherine, now stronger but still recovering, became an unexpected bridge between the camps. Her natural diplomacy and genuine kindness made it impossible for Camilla to maintain complete hostility, while her continued health struggles reminded everyone why the confrontation had occurred in the first place. A turning point came during a state dinner in the new year. Catherine, attending her first major event since her illness, looked radiant but fragile. When she stumbled slightly on the stairs, both William and Camilla instinctively moved to help her. Their eyes met over Catherine's head, and for a moment, the shared concern for the young woman overshadowed their personal animosity. The moment passed quickly, but it marked the beginning of a slow thaw. Camilla, seeing Catherine's genuine struggle and grace, began to understand William's protective instincts. William, seeing Camilla's authentic concern, remembered that beneath the institutional coldness was a woman who had faced her own struggles within the royal framework. Private apologies were eventually exchanged, though the words were carefully chosen and the meetings brief. Neither William nor Camilla would fully forget the confrontation, but both recognized the need to move forward for the sake of the institution they both served. Albeit with different visions, the memo that had sparked the confrontation was never mentioned again, but its impact was felt in every subsequent palace decision. New protocols were quietly instituted that required family consultation before any decisions about role redistribution. Health and well-being became formal considerations in royal scheduling, not just private concerns. Years later, palace historians would mark William's confrontation with Camilla as a watershed moment in the modernization of the British monarchy. It represented a generational shift in how the royal family balanced duty with humanity, institution with individual well-being. Some criticized William for his loss of control, arguing that he had damaged the dignity of the crown with his emotional outburst. Others praised him for standing up for his wife and challenging outdated practices that had caused so much pain in the past. The debate continued in royal biographies and documentaries, becoming part of the complex tapestry of modern royal history. For Catherine, the incident became a source of both gratitude and concern. She was touched by William's fierce protection but worried about the cost to family harmony. In private moments, she would trace the worry lines that had appeared on her husband's face since that day, understanding that his outburst had come from a place of deep love and deeper fear. The palace staff, those silent witnesses to history, incorporated the story into their informal training of new employees. It became a cautionary tale about the importance of considering the human element in palace operations, a reminder that behind the titles and tiaras were real people with real emotions. As William and Catherine's children grew, they would occasionally overhear whispered references to the day their father had stood up to Camilla. The story took on mythic proportions in their young minds, painting their father as a heroic figure who had defended their mother against palace dragons. William, when he learned of these overheard tales, made sure to provide context, teaching his children that standing up for family was important, but so was finding ways to resolve conflicts with dignity. The relationship between William and Camilla never fully recovered its previous warmth, but it evolved into a functional partnership based on mutual respect for each other's roles. They learned to work together when necessary, maintaining professional courtesy even when personal warmth was lacking. Charles, relieved to have achieved even this level of détente, accepted that some wounds might never fully heal. In the end, the explosive confrontation in the Green Salon became part of the complex story of the modern monarchy's evolution. It represented a moment when love triumphed over protocol, when a husband's protective instincts overrode royal training, and when the younger generation made it clear that the old ways of suffering in silence were no longer acceptable. The palace walls, which had absorbed so many secrets over the centuries, added this dramatic confrontation to their silent archive. Future generations would walk those same corridors, perhaps sensing the echoes of that emotional day when Prince William's roar of protection for his wife shook the very foundations of royal protocol and forever changed the balance of power within the House of Windsor.